Hey everyone, this is Karenology. You won't believe the insane drama that just unfolded. Let's get into it. They dragged it like a dead animal, tail scraping the driveway. The dented propeller spinning just enough to mock me in the porch light. The tow truck's winch screeched like a gutting knife. I was still barefoot, in flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt that hadn't seen the sun in years, stumbling down the front steps yelling, "Hey! Stop! That's evidence!" Karen stood at the edge of my property line, arms crossed like a vulture perched on a fence post. Smug smile smeared across her round face. Her floral blouse looked like it had been stitched from the wallpaper of a 1970s dentist's office. "Your junk plane's an eyesore." "Zerter, sir." "Sar." Owner Association made the decision days ago. You had your chance. I shoved past the deputy who tried to block me. "Don't touch it! That aircraft is part of a federal investigation." "Sir, step back," the deputy warned, resting his hand on his belt like he practiced it in the mirror every morning. But I didn't, because they didn't understand. No one did. That rusted-out, burnt shell of aluminum wasn't just a wreck. It was what was left of a young man's last flight. A student. My student. 19 years old. Nervous. Eager. Dead. His name was Cody Grant. 2 years ago, we went up in a Piper PA-28 for his final solo. He never came back. Pieces of the fuselage were recovered over 70 miles apart. But the tail section, my tail section, washed up in the marsh behind my property 5 months later, half submerged and reeking of oil and salt and death. I dragged it home, cleaned it by hand, and reported it. And then I waited for the National Transportation Safety Board to act. They didn't. So, I kept it. Kept it where I could see it, where I could remember, where I could run my fingers over the sheared metal and remember the panic in his voice on the last radio call. Karen knew all that. I told her. I told the whole damn board. And now she had it towed away like a rusted grill. "This is theft," I barked. "You have no authority." "Actually," Karen purred, holding up a crumpled paper, "you were sent 3 warnings. You ignored all of them." I watched the truck lurch forward, the fuselage bumping over the gravel like a broken spine. I felt something go silent in my chest. They were destroying evidence. The last real piece of that crash. Maybe the only piece that mattered. I went inside, hands trembling, slammed the door, and stood in the dark, heart racing, brain screaming. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or punch a hole through the wall. Cody's mom still called me sometimes, just to talk, just to ask if I'd heard anything. She never blamed me. Maybe that made it worse. The phone rang. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was her. I didn't pick up. What was I supposed to tell her? That the last piece of her son was now probably being disassembled in some scrapyard because a vindictive housewife decided her garden parties were more important? I stared out the window. Karen was still there, smug as hell, talking to the deputy. Her mouth moved like a frog chewing gum. She looked proud, and I knew right then that this wasn't about property ordinances. This was about control, about erasure, about pretending like nothing bad had ever happened in our perfect little community. Well, she'd made a mistake Because that plane wasn't just evidence. It was the start of something bigger, and I was done waiting. I grabbed my jacket, and I started walking. I didn't drive. Not that night. I needed to feel the ground under my boots, needed the cold to scrape against my face like sandpaper. It kept the anger sharp. I walked 3 miles down to Old Mill Salvage Yard. Place looked like a graveyard for forgotten lives. Cars stripped to bones. Appliances twisted like fossils. And now, somewhere in there, was my tail section. The chain-link fence was still lit up by overhead sodium lamps. The gate was closed, but the side footpath wasn't locked. It never was. I stepped through like I belonged there. Maybe I did. The man who ran it, Rick, owed me more than one favor. I'd helped his boy get his private pilot's license a few years back. He was in Arizona now, crop dusting. Still sent me Christmas cards. I found Rick in the shed behind the office, sipping something brown from a ceramic mug that probably hadn't seen soap in weeks. He looked up, saw my face, and didn't even ask. That back lot, he said. East corner. Came in less than an hour ago. I didn't say thanks. Didn't need to. He understood. I moved fast. The lights didn't reach all the way to the corner, but I didn't need them. I knew that tail like I knew my own hands. And there it was, already hoisted onto a flatbed, rope biting into the scorched aluminum. Red paint scraped and faded like old blood. They hadn't even bothered to cover it. It took everything in me not to lose it right there. I climbed up onto the flatbed. My hand traced the jagged tear along the lower stabilizer. Still there. But something wasn't. The rudder bracket was gone. I swore under my breath. That bracket had been cracked. Cody's flight instructor suspected it had failed mid-air, but there was no proof. That bracket could have been the proof. Gone. I dropped to the ground and scanned the area. Nothing. Just shadows and the hum of high-voltage lines above. Rick came up behind me. They stripped a few parts already. Got orders to melt most of it tomorrow. Who gave those orders? Das Carpenter, Rick hesitated. Karen called. Said it was private removal. Didn't mention it was evidence. I laughed once, bitter and low. She knew. She damn well knew. Rick looked uneasy. If it's federal, you should call somebody. NTSB, maybe. I did, I said, jaw clenched. Over a year ago. He didn't ask what happened. Just nodded and walked back to his shed. I stayed. Just stood there for a while, cold biting through my jacket, staring at the hollow, empty plane. Thinking about the last message Cody ever sent, altitude dropping, trying to... That was it. Then static, then nothing. And now they were going to melt down, the only part of that day that still had a story to tell. I pulled out my phone, opened the old file from my email, the one I'd sent to the investigator who never followed up. Photos, notes, theories, my own diagrams, all of it. And right there, at the bottom, the serial number of the rudder bracket. I still had it. Maybe I couldn't stop them from destroying the shell, but maybe I could find the piece that mattered. I turned and walked back toward the main office. Rick was locking up. Any chance you know where that bracket went? I asked. He rubbed his beard. Parts guy came earlier. Drives a white pickup. Custom trailer? Might have taken it. License plate? Didn't catch it. I sighed. But then he added, wait. He always stops at Marla's Diner off Route 12. Says it's the only place that makes his coffee strong enough to keep him awake through Kansas. I nodded once. Then I turned and headed for home. I needed rest. And tomorrow I was going hunting. Not for vengeance. For the truth. I didn't sleep. Not really. Just lay there with my boots still on, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow like a lazy accusation. My mind replayed every inch of that bracket. The crack, the discoloration, the corrosion where metal should have held. I'd taken a photo. Sent it in. No reply. No call back. The world moved on. But I didn't. At 6:05 a.m., I pulled out of my driveway in my old Chevy. The one with the dented side mirror and an engine that sounded like it had secrets. Route 12 was half fog and half light. And by the time I pulled up to Marla's diner, the parking lot smelled like fried bacon and burnt diesel. And there it was. A white pickup with a trailer. Custom frame, reinforced axles, dual winch system. Parts hauler. No license plate on the front. Inside, the diner was warm and humming with early morning regulars. Retirees in flannel, truckers slumped over mugs, a waitress named Debbie who could kill a man with a glare. I found him at the end booth. Greasy ponytail, tattoo sleeve, grease under his fingernails, eating eggs like they owed him money. I slid into the booth across from him without asking. He looked up. Didn't like being cornered. You lost, old man? I put my phone on the table and turned it around. The photo of the rudder bracket filled the screen. You picked this up last night. Tail section from a Piper. What did you do with the bracket? He chuckled. Buddy, I pick up 100 parts a week. You think I catalog 'em like antiques? That one had a crack the size of a fingernail. Missing weld seal. It's evidence in a federal case. If you sold it for scrap, you may have just tampered with an investigation. He blinked, got quiet. Then he leaned in, voice lower. I didn't sell it. Something about it looked off. I threw it in a bin I keep for weird pieces. Kept the tag on it. Where's the bin? Back at my shop? I want it. He shrugged. You buying? I reached into my coat, pulled out a roll of 20s, slammed it on the table. That's 200. More if it's intact. He stared at the cash, then at me. Something shifted in his face. Not fear. Respect, maybe. Or just business. Meet me at 10. I'll be back in town. I'll bring the bin. I nodded and stood up. As I turned to leave, I caught Karen's voice. I froze. Amici, you tours. She was 2 booths behind me. I hadn't seen her come in. She was on the phone, speaking low and sharp. No, I don't care if he's upset. He left garbage on community land. I had every right. If he wants to make a fuss, let him. The association will back me up. Saws, she laughed. And I remembered something I hadn't thought of in months. During one of the last board meetings I'd attended, Karen had asked about insurance. Specifically, liability coverage for community safety hazards. She was obsessed with it. Asked if wreckage counted. Asked what would happen if someone sued over something like a crash. Back then, I thought it was just another control freak being paranoid. Now I wasn't so sure. I stepped outside, heart pounding. She knew that plane was evidence. And she had it removed not because it was ugly, but because it was dangerous. To her, to the whole board. If that bracket proved mechanical failure, it wouldn't just clear Cody's name. It would expose a whole web of neglect, cover-up, and insurance fraud. And suddenly, I wasn't just chasing closure. I was chasing something much bigger, something they'd burn a plane to hide. At 9:58 a.m., I was already parked behind the old feed store just outside town, leaning against my truck, arms crossed, waiting. The air was thick with the smell of grain dust and rusted metal. Right on time, the white pickup rolled in. The hauler stepped out, nodded once, and opened the trailer. Inside were 3 battered bins, marked with faded red letters. Alum, steel, Mieski. He pulled out the misc bin and popped the lid. There it was. Bent, scorched, but unmistakable. The rudder bracket. My breath caught. The fracture line ran like a scar across the center mount. The serial number was still partially visible. That's it, I said, stepping closer. He scratched his chin. Didn't seem like anything special. You have no idea, I muttered. I handed him the rest of the cash and took the bracket like it was made of glass. I wrapped it in an old army poncho liner from my truck bed and tucked it inside a storage case. Then I stood there a second longer, feeling the weight of it in my arms. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like holding a coffin handle. You gonna report it? He asked, curious now. Not yet, I said, because I didn't trust the official channels anymore. I'd tried that route before. It led to silence, to polite emails, to a phone number that rang into nowhere. This time I'd do it my way. I drove straight to the airfield. Not the big municipal one, but the small strip out by the hills, where the hangars were more rust than paint, and the coffee always tasted like jet fuel. That's where I found Benny, retired A&P mechanic. 67 years old. More scar tissue than skin on his hands. He owed me a favor or two. He examined the bracket under a jeweler's loupe while chewing on a toothpick. Oh, well damn, he said finally. You weren't kidding. That's a fatigue crack. Long-term stress fracture, probably propagated over dozens of hours. Could it fail midair? Easily, especially if it wasn't caught during maintenance. This could have snapped your boy's rudder clean off. I nodded slowly. You think you could write that up? Text statement? With photos? Sure. But what for? Statute of limitations on civil suits passed. And the NTSB ain't gonna touch it now unless you've got something big. I do, I said. A reason I didn't explain. Benny didn't ask. But as I drove back toward town, bracket safely stowed, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something close to control. Like maybe Cody's death wouldn't just vanish into paperwork. That lasted until I turned onto my street. My mailbox was lying on the ground. Post ripped clean out of the concrete. And there, painted in big red letters across my garage door, was the word liar. I hit the brakes, just sat there. Neighbors watched from their windows. Curtains twitching. No one came out. No one said a word, and I realized something. Karen wasn't acting alone anymore. This wasn't just about property or noise complaints. Someone was scared. Someone who knew what I was digging up, and they just made the mistake of reminding me I was getting close. I stepped out of the truck, pulled out my phone, took a picture of the graffiti. Then I walked inside, locked the door, and started printing every document I had. If they wanted to intimidate me, they were going to learn the hard way. You don't scare a man who's already lost everything. I spent the next 2 days assembling a case like I was back in the Army, prepping for an intel briefing that could decide lives. My kitchen table vanished under piles of documents, photos, maintenance reports, Cody's training logs, Benny's tech statement, and my own annotated diagrams of the bracket and flight path. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours. I kept going over the same questions in my head. Why now? Why take the plane now, 2 years after the crash? Why risk towing a wreck that had sat untouched? Because someone knew I was getting close. Someone had been watching, and they'd panicked. On the 3rd morning, I got a letter, hand-delivered, no stamp, just folded and taped to my front door. It read, "Drop it. Or next time, it's not your garage." No signature. Just the words, in block print. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't trust him. He'd been at the scene the night of the tow and said nothing. Instead, I made 3 copies of everything, digital and physical. Stored one in my old ammo box under the floorboards. Mailed another to a friend of mine from the service, now working at an aviation nonprofit. And the last copy I packed into a briefcase. Then I drove to the community association's next open meeting. They didn't expect to see me. The room was full. Fold-out chairs, coffee urns, Karen at the podium in her power blazer, smug as a fox in a chicken yard. "Tracy, ma call your a you e." And as we continue to beautify the community, she was saying, we appreciate everyone's cooperation in keeping our properties clear of unsafe and unsightly materials. I stepped into the aisle. Didn't raise my hand. Just walked forward. She stopped speaking. Everyone turned. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, holding up the briefcase, "but I have some material you all might want to see." Karen's smile twitched. "Mr. Preston, this isn't a forum for..." "This is evidence," I said, voice loud enough to reach the back, "of a fatal mechanical failure, of a component removed from a crash site by your order. Evidence you destroyed." A murmur. Some gasps. Someone stood up in the back. Karen tried to regain control. "We followed proper protocol." Did you know Cody Grant's crash may have been caused by a faulty bracket you had hauled off as junk? Did you know that removing it before a formal NTSB investigation constitutes obstruction?" She paled, then snapped, "Mr. Preston, if you don't leave, we will call security." Go ahead," I said. "But first, tell the board when you first asked about crash liability insurance. Tell them why you really wanted that wreck gone." Silence. I looked around the room. Saw confusion, unease, but no help. Not yet. Karen gathered herself. "This man has a personal vendetta. He's traumatized and using our meeting for his own agenda." She motioned to a man in a blazer. Some community security hire. He started toward me. I pulled a small recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Karen's voice, recorded at Marla's diner. If he wants to make a fuss, let him. The association will back me up." Gasps again. A few people stood. Someone muttered, "Is that real?" Karen's face turned to stone. You recorded me?" "I did," I said, "and I've sent this to more than a few places, so you can kick me out. But you can't bury the truth." I turned and walked out, heart pounding. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like bait, because if they were willing to threaten me in my own home and vandalize my property and send warning letters, they weren't done. They were just getting started. That night, I left every light off in the house. Sat in the dark with a shotgun across my lap. Back to the wall. Eyes on the front door. The kind of night you don't forget. The kind where shadows move even when the wind doesn't. I wasn't scared. Not in the traditional sense. I'd seen real fear. Combat zones, burning wrecks, silence after impact. This wasn't that. This was calculation. I was waiting. For something I couldn't name but knew would come. At 2:41 a.m. I heard the gravel crunch. Then nothing. Then a low scrape. Like metal on concrete. I moved like muscle memory. Out the back door, around the side, through the trees I'd planted 30 years ago. There they were. 2 men in dark jackets, faces covered. One had a crowbar. The other held a gas can. They were at my garage. I didn't shout. I didn't warn. I just stepped out of the dark with the barrel aimed dead center. You've got 3 seconds to drop that and run. 1, 2. They dropped everything and bolted. No heroics. Just fear. Real fear. I didn't chase. Just stood there, breathing in the sharp stink of gasoline. They'd come to burn it. My home, my life, everything. I called no one. Not the sheriff. Not the fire department. Because the system wasn't going to save me. Instead, I waited until morning and drove into town. Found the only place that still made business cards on the spot. Picked up 100. Black print on white stock. Stephen Preston, aviation safety consultant, private. Investigating the unanswered. Below that, a new email address and a phone number I'd set up just for this. Then I went to the one person I hadn't spoken to since Cody's death, his mother. Martha Grant lived in a beige, single wide near the edge of town. Flowers on the porch. Quiet yard. No car in the drive. I knocked once. She opened the door and froze. I heard, she said quietly. They took the plane, I said, but I got the bracket back. She didn't cry. Didn't speak for a long time. Then, you really think this wasn't pilot error? I don't think. I know. The rudder bracket was cracked. Benny confirmed it. I've got documentation, photos, statement, the works. But they said, they were wrong, or they didn't want to look. Either way, they failed him. We don't have to. She opened the door wider. Let me in. Over coffee? At a chipped Formica table? I showed her everything. She read it slowly, lips pressed tight. When she was done, she nodded once. What now? Now, I said, sliding her one of the business cards. We take this public. Not through the news, not through lawsuits, through people, through families. We reach out to anyone who's lost someone in a crash and never got answers. We build something real. We turn this into pressure. She looked at the card. And the homeowner association? Let them come. I'm done playing defense. When I left her house, the sun was rising. Light spilling across the fields like the first honest thing I'd seen in weeks. But my phone buzzed before I made it to the truck. Unknown number. I answered. A voice I didn't recognize said, You've made a lot of noise, Mr. Preston. That can be dangerous. Click. Deadline. And just like that, the next phase began. The next few weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, handshakes, and long drives. I spoke in American Legion halls, at small-town community centers, even once at the back of a hardware store in Arkansas. I told Cody's story, showed the bracket, let people touch it. They listened. Some cried. Others came forward. One man had lost a daughter in a crop duster crash. Another's brother died during a test flight in New Mexico. Each had a piece, a fragment, a report that didn't make sense. And every time I laid Cody's case next to theirs, patterns began to show. Negligent inspections, rushed certifications, corners cut. I compiled everything, every testimony, every document, built a portfolio thicker than a phone book. I wasn't just chasing Karen anymore. I was chasing something systemic. But Karen wasn't sitting still either. She'd started a campaign to discredit me. Flyers around town, posts on community forums calling me unhinged, accused me of exploiting a dead boy's memory for personal revenge, claimed I faked the bracket. One day, I found my truck tires slashed outside the diner. Another, someone broke into my shed and stole every printout I'd made. Didn't matter. I had backups. I had momentum. And more importantly, I had people. Martha joined me on stage in Tulsa. Her voice never shook. When she held up Cody's last letter, creased, oil-smudged, folded into a perfect square, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. That's when something shifted. People stopped seeing me as a grieving old pilot. They started seeing me as what I'd become, a threat. The next morning, my bank account was frozen. Suspicious activity, they claimed. My utilities were cut off for missed payments. Payments I'd made. My name was flagged on a background check, which kept me from renting equipment. Systemic, not just petty sabotage now. Someone was pulling strings. I drove straight to the county recorder's office, asked to see the titles and land records for my neighborhood, and there it was. Karen had filed a complaint, citing community safety violations, which she used to trigger a quiet clause in the homeowner association bylaws. A clause that allowed the board to propose eminent domain on properties deemed hazardous. My property. She wasn't just trying to silence me. She was trying to erase me. I walked out of that office shaking. Not from fear, from fury. The kind of fury that sharpens into purpose. I didn't go home. I drove to Benny's hangar. We pulled the old tools out of the corner, sanded down a metal plate, etched the serial number into it, mounted the bracket on a board, sealed it under plexiglass. Then we drove to the next town over, where a small aviation museum stood half forgotten, and I gave them the piece. Put this on display, I told the curator. No plaque, no backstory, just the bracket. Let people ask questions. Let them wonder, she agreed, and just like that, I took away Karen's ability to make it disappear. That night, my house was broken into. They didn't steal anything. They just left the front door hanging open, and on the kitchen table, a single nail, driven into the wood, a message. Next time, it wouldn't be a warning, but I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. I knew they'd come again. The first time was to scare me. The second would be to end it. So I turned my house into a message. I rewired the floodlights to motion sensors, installed a camera in the scarecrow out front, reinforced the door with a steel bar from the inside. But the real move wasn't about defense. It was bait. I leaked my own address, posted in the same forum where Karen's people had been calling me a fraud. I claimed I'd found a second bracket, said I was keeping it in my garage. That same night, I parked my truck 2 blocks away and waited on the neighbor's porch, hidden behind a lattice of honeysuckle and bad blood. At 2:12 a.m., a van rolled in. No lights, no plates. 2 figures stepped out, one with bolt cutters, the other holding a canvas bag. They slipped through the gate and moved fast, straight to the garage. I gave it 10 seconds. Then I triggered the lights. They froze. Deer in the headlights. Only this time, the deer had a shotgun. I stepped out, aimed low. Don't move. They bolted, but I wasn't chasing them. I was filming. Camera from the scarecrow. Audio from the window mic. Faces caught. Voices recorded. The van peeled off, tires screaming. But I had what I needed. I called a number I hadn't used in years. The man on the other end picked up after one ring. "It's time," I said. The next day, a courier delivered a single package to Karen's front door. Inside, a photo of the two intruders. Faces clear, time-stamped, and a typed note. You escalated," I responded. "Walk away before this gets public." No signature, but I knew she'd read it. I knew she'd understand what it meant. This wasn't a warning. It was a line drawn in concrete. But Karen wasn't the only threat anymore. The association board had gone quiet. Too quiet. Then I found out why. A local developer, Glenn Marwick, slick-haired and teeth like bleached knives, had been negotiating to purchase 3 blocks of our neighborhood, including mine. Karen was just his puppet. He didn't care about Cody, or the bracket, or me. He cared about land, money, quiet transactions, and I'd made noise, loud noise. I needed leverage. Not rumors, not threats, something permanent. So I went back to the Aviation Museum. Spoke with the curator. She agreed to a little update. We added a QR code next to the bracket, scanned it, and you were taken to a secure site with every document, every testimony, every photo. No commentary, just facts. And once a week, I mailed that link, anonymously, to local newspapers, school boards, real estate firms. The story wasn't viral. It was slow, creeping. I wasn't burning down their empire. I was rotting it from the foundation. And then came the call I didn't expect, from Karen. I need to meet," she said. Her voice was flat, no venom. We met in a church parking lot. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. Like all her certainty had been drained. "I didn't know what he was planning," she said. "Marwick. He told me it was cleanup. Said your place was dangerous. And you believed him?" I wanted to, because it made things easier. "So why are you here?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "This is his offer. He wants me to sign over rights to 3 parcels as soon as you're evicted. But he's changed the timeline. He's not waiting anymore." "Why tell me?" "Ouch, because he's coming tonight, and when it happens, I won't be part of it." She left the folder on the hood of my truck and walked away. I opened it. Inside, blueprints, purchase agreements, and a photo of my house, marked with a red X. They weren't going to burn it. They were going to demolish it. I didn't run. That's not who I am. But I didn't sit still either. I moved everything that mattered. Documents, photos, backups, to a storage unit 2 towns over. Cleared the house of anything they could twist into liability. Then I waited. Sunset came slow. I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee and the same shotgun I'd kept beside me that first night. I wasn't naive. I didn't think I could stop a bulldozer with buckshot. But this wasn't about stopping. This was about witnessing. At 11:42 p.m., I heard it. The rumble of diesel. Headlights cresting the hill. Not one, but 2 trucks. One hauling a loader. The other with construction lights and cones. No city markings, no permits, no police, just steel and silence. They pulled up like they owned the place. 4 men got out. No hesitation. Hard hats, vests, but no names, No logos. One approached with a clipboard. Didn't even look at me. You need to vacate. Emergency hazard abatement. I sipped my coffee. Got paperwork? It's on file. That's not how the law works. He didn't respond. Behind him, the loader roared to life. I stood. If you touch this property, I promise you, the fallout won't come tomorrow. It'll come right now. The loader lurched forward, 10 feet, 5. Then the sound hit them. Sirens, not police. Fire trucks, 3 of them. Screaming down the road, lights blazing. The construction crew froze. The loader cut off. The trucks surrounded the street. Out stepped the fire chief himself, Jared Knox. Retired Marine. Knew my face. More importantly, knew my history. This a drill? The clipboard man asked. No, Knox said. It's an emergency response to a suspected gas leak. He looked at me. Just enough to let me know. House is flagged. No digging, no demolition, no entry. Code red. The crew argued. Tried calling someone. Got nothing. Within 10 minutes, they were packing up. By midnight, they were gone. I exhaled. Finally, Knox walked over. Martha called me. Said you were sitting on a war zone. Figured I'd buy you a little time. Thanks. He nodded once. I won't ask what's really going on. But I'll say this. If they're coming after you like this, you're doing something right. When he left, I stood alone in the dark. The next morning, I filed a motion with the county to rezone my property as a memorial site, to private aviation history marker. I called it. Legal, protected, untouchable. I held a dedication 2 weeks later. Small, quiet. Cody's mother placed a plaque next to the concrete slab where the bracket once sat. A few families came. Benny, the museum curator, even Karen, standing far in the back, silent. I never spoke to her again, but I didn't need to. I'd already won, not by shouting louder, not by suing or filming or begging, but by changing the game entirely. The bracket stayed. The story stayed. And when the developer tried again 6 months later, the historical designation stopped him cold. Any attempt to build would require a full environmental and aviation safety impact study. Public, messy, and slow. He walked away. The house still stands, quiet, solid. And if you drive down Sycamore Road and past the crooked mailbox and the sun-bleached porch, you'll see a small metal plate by the front gate. It reads, "In memory of those who flew and those who fell." And underneath, in smaller letters, you can't bury the truth, not forever.